Did you know that racism was invented in the 1600s? Yeah, me neither. But fortunately for all of us, Black Cleopatra is here to explain to us how history literally began with the transatlantic slave trade. Oh, this'll be quite something right here. So, all of this comes from a podcast that the Black Cleopatra star Adele James carried out. Now, normally I'd go find the podcast and play you the bits, but I refuse to infest my otherwise innocent computer with Apple iTunes. It simply hasn't committed a grave enough sin or crime, to my knowledge at least, that warrants such cruel and unusual punishment. So, instead, we're going to have a look at the article written up about it from Bounding Into Comics, which incidentally is also a really good website that you should definitely check out. So, let's have a look, shall we? Though there has been a loud backlash from Egyptian nationals, including the country's government itself, and, their Minister of Antiquity, the guy who should know the most about this out of pretty much everyone, Netflix race-swapping of the history for Queen Cleopatra, the docu-series, quotation marks, Adele James cares little for any of it, as she believes that all of it is based on nothing more than a mix of self-hatred and, of course, racism. Natürlich. What? It pretty much follows the statements made by the director of the series, explaining that the only reasons why the Egyptians are upset is because they are infested with whiteness. God, you need to enter into a whole different dimension to begin explaining this nonsense, but we've got worse still left to come, so let's move on a little bit before we get into the deep dive here, shall we? James broke her silence on the topic during a recent appearance on the 79th episode of the Wayne Ayers podcast. Asked by the eponymous host for her opinion on the fact that people are mad about Cleopatra being blackwashed, the British actress replied, "Blackwashing isn't a thing, is it?" says the black woman playing a white Egyptian queen in a documentary series. Honey, I'm sorry to say this, but you appear to be retarded. And I mean that in the medical sense. I mean that in the actual, you appear to have less brain matter or fewer functioning neurons than the average human being. I am not dissing you, I am making a diagnosis. Because you seem to be incapable of observing the world around you and the circumstances in which you find yourself. I am somehow relatively certain that you do indeed identify yourself as a black woman, and seeing as every single solitary piece of historical evidence and indication suggests quite clearly that Cleopatra was not a black woman, you must quite clearly see how this is blackwashing. Or hell, even if we are incapable of understanding this rationale, let's just simply set up a slightly different scenario, should we? What if we make a show about Shaka Zulu, one of the greatest Africans to have ever lived, straight up, and we make him into a white ginger dude, Irish preferably? Would there be a problem with this? And the answer is, of course, yes. And the answer is, of course, yes, and it's because you're white. Literally, that's what the argument boils down to. The power privilege stack. You can't blackwash anything because black people are a minority. Despite, actually globally being not a minority, but details, they're a minority in America. And since this person's worldview is now entirely American-centralized, that is the only frame through which you can view anything, as she will add on yet further with the idea that racism began in the 1600s. Let's move onward, shall we, so we can get the full picture of the lunacy here. I find it sad that people are either so self-loathing or so threatened by the blackness that they feel the need to do that to separate Egypt from the rest of the continent. I do find that funny too, because again, self-loathing. The Egyptians aren't black. You wouldn't recognize the Egyptians as black people. That's not self-loathing. And separate them from the rest of the continent. It's like, well, if you live in Africa, you must be black. No, again, this is one of the reasons why Africans, and Egyptians in this case, hate American, and in this case, British black people, because they look at Africa and go, oh right, Africa, that's just a single homogenous nation, right? With black people in it. No! The black people in Africa take considerable umbrage at certain other groups of black people in Africa. They're a rather, divisive society, shall we say. They view each other more like Europeans view each other. Europeans don't consider themselves to all be white first and foremost. They view each other as Dutch, as Swedes, as Norwegians, Germans, English, French, Italians, etc., etc. That is the way in which the Africans view themselves, rather than the mass grouping of, well, we're black, so I guess we should all be friends. But don't you dare step foot on my land, mind you. Following a brief discussion about her process preparing for the overall, Ayers then inquired with James about whether or not the fact that nobody has seen it yet but everybody is bashing it has been the biggest career obstacle for you. Now, here's the thing. Nobody has seen it yet but everybody is bashing it. Hell, 10 years ago, I would have said, that's a reasonable concern. That's a reasonable complaint. Like, nobody's watched it, so nobody can really judge it. Hell, that was a line that I kept trotting out all the time during the lead up to various Total War games, for example, because, you know, it could be good. I still say that sometimes, despite many lessons to the contrary. But when you are making a documentary series, which this, I remind you, is supposed to be, and you cannot even get the color of the people involved correct, you have already stumbled at the first hurdle. Even more so when you choose to do this not because you are merely ignorant of the reality, but because it would make a political statement, as is a direct quote from the director of Cleopatra. You've not only stumbled at the first hurdle, you have elected to bury yourself beneath it and build this two-story home down there. Like, it is not a mere accident at that point, it is a deliberate action to undermine your very premise. Now, if you'd called this a soap opera, I'd probably shrug and go like, well, that's cringe, and you still have an obvious political ideology here. But no, you are trying to claim that this is history, which makes it even worse. There was absolutely a lot of people saying very horrible things, but it definitely wasn't everyone. Mouth breather. I think that's so important to remember that, like, in the grand scheme of things, there were some people who lost their minds over it, but there was a lot of really positive response immediately as well. And it's consistent, people are so excited, I'm guessing the messages all the time. I am sure that within your very own bubble of, well, reassurances, you are getting a lot of positive feedback. Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't amount to the majority of people. But this is the biggest thing I've had to deal with in the public sphere. It is the most I've had to navigate personally. As an actress, this has definitely elevated my profile considerably on an international scale. This is the important thing right here. So, the podcast host is like, oh, this must have been horrible. You've been bullied by so many people, you know, the white supremacists and the fascists, etc. Hint, 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 hint. It's the same thing they did with the Sith lady, Reva, and thing, where Disney had literally told her before they started filming, by the way, you're gonna get some racist backlash because, well, 1, we know you can't act, 2, the script is awful, and 3, we're going to destroy a beloved character, Obi-Wan Kenobi, in this show, and we're gonna make you insufferable. So when that happens, please remember point number 4, call us so we can use it in our marketing campaign. But unfortunately, she bungles this a little bit, because again, the neurons are not actively firing here, and instead she goes in the direction of, this has been fantastic for my career. Do you have any idea how many Google's hits I've had now? And ironically, is probably true. It's this ridiculous thing that, okay, you are a Netflix person who has been set up to this role specifically because of your skin color, first and foremost, to push a political message, again, as made very clear by the director, and you are now getting a backlash for, well, doing your job in the marketing machine of modern-day racism. And she knows that. She knows that is good for her. It elevates her profile, as she says. The biggest show I had done before this was television programming here in the UK, soap opera Casualty, that does have repeats in other parts of Europe, but several years down the line, it's the UK is the big, but outside of the UK it's not as big, so this is like a whole nother scale of project for me. Again, she is elated over this. She doesn't view this as a problem or a negative, as she's being attacked or harassed or anything. She views this as a fantastic career opportunity. I would say it's not wholly negative, she continues, as she digs furiously, and actually, as time has gone on, those voices have gotten quieter and quieter. doubt. Ayers then broached the topic of the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Archaeology's recent criticism of the Netflix series, to which James responded with dismissive laughter. Yeah, I know I shouldn't laugh, but it's quite funny. The actress explained of her knee-jerk response. It's quite funny. The level of threat that you must feel just on my skin tone to file a lawsuit against an entire streaming service, that to me really is extreme. It's really an extreme reaction. No, making sure that you are the correct skin tone for the role, race-swapping a historical character everybody knows to be another tone, specifically for political gains, that is extreme. The victim of this then going, no, we don't want to let you do this, is a natural defensive reaction. It is you being racist and them going, stop it. And of course also the Change.org removing the petition, which we all know why happened. James would then reveal that her defense of Netflix race swapping was rooted in contemporary notions of race politics. Ah yes, here we go. The Egyptian people was 100% fundamentally rooted in racism, which is a very modern ideology. Ah yes, racism is a modern ideology quite recently invented by the Egyptians in part. The ancient Egyptians don't think about race like we do, because race has only really been contextualized since the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't kidding. She believes that racism was invented in the 1600s with the transatlantic slave trade, and the Egyptians, they just didn't see race. They didn't understand the concept. It's just like, well, here comes a bunch of white people with very long spears and subjugates us. Friends and neighbors. Oh, here comes another bunch of white people, this time with short stabby spears. Friends and neighbors once more. But the Numidians, however, or the Hebrews. Well, let me put it this way. You know the meme? You know the whole like, okay, terrorist, the color swatch meme? The Egyptians literally made that. I'm not kidding. So some of the ancient stuff we have from Egypt includes a color swatch breakdown of the color of various races. The Egyptians were very much so aware that races existed, and they were very much so judgmental of race as well, because this has literally been out throughout human history to greater or lesser degrees. Now, you might say that the current year American interpretation of race and racism is a very modern invention. In fact, it's only been around for about maybe less than 100 years, 50, 60, 70 maybe. And this is the view where they think that history began with the transatlantic slave trade. And so the history of ancient Egypt must be viewed through the political lens of the transatlantic slave trade. Which is, it's why we now have Black Cleopatra, because it would be a powerful political statement. I return to this time and time again, just to make it clear. The reason why this is being done is for contemporary political reasons. And that is her view of racism, not as in treating other races differently or having opinions as to their values based on skin color or anything like that. It is the modern day American interpretation of racism, which is white people evil, all good things African. Africa being just simply black with no differences whatsoever at that point. That's not how people thought back then, right? ? So it's really bizarre, but to me, I find it very sad. I feel sad for them. Do you hear that, Egyptians? She feels sad for you that you are denying your blackness and that you are corrupted by whiteness. I mean, she, from her point of view, she does have a point. Indeed, that version of racism where whiteness is a thing that black and brown people can be corrupted by as if it was the thing of the warp, that is a very modern ideology. Also like how she keeps asking, like, right? ? You're on my side, right? I've been told this by that weird American producer developer lady. Like, I'm just accepting this at this point, and I'm hoping that you will, verify my suspicions that the world is indeed flat. Oh yeah. Closing out the conversation about the Netflix series, Ayers ultimately asked James what she hoped critics could gain from watching the series. Well, if they watch it, they give us some hate views. Oh, don't worry, I do intend to watch it, but I have access to means to get a hold of your episode without you getting any sort of benefit from it. The internet is a wonderful thing. I hope that they will understand that this is a debate. It's a conversation. It's not a definitive answer. Woman, you are making a Netflix documentary series. You are pretending to be representing history. You are not posing a question. You are not going, what if she was black, and then being hit by the evidence? Because you have been given the evidence. The Ministry of Egypt has gone, no, look at this. This is not a conversation. You are not having a debate. You are telling and then saying, well, history started with the transatlantic slave trade, and therefore Cleopatra was black. It is rote talking points. It has no weight. She has no understanding of what she's saying here. It is simply just what they say. And actually, the research on it is really interesting, and the people talking about it are really interesting. And I'm sure they'll discover quite quickly that the series is about so much more than that. Cleopatra is no more reduced to what her heritage may or may not be, have been, than I am or any of us. Then why did you elect to make her a black woman for political reasons? Again, this person does not understand the words she is speaking. She has been told this, presumably by the American, and that is why her worldview is now so incredibly American-centrist, to the point that racism has been invented during the slave trade. All of the preceding slave trades, mind you, not racist in the slightest. They didn't have any racial motifs at all. You know, the enslavement of the Hebrew people in Egypt being one example, the Muslim slave trade, which preyed primarily upon blacks, etc. None of that had a racial component. They didn't see race. They just happened to be catching mostly black people. Oh, very convenient, I suppose. Colorblind racism. No, colorblind slavery, excuse me, that's more correct. And hey, racism wasn't the only reason. I guess that's a qualifying remark to make as well, but what an idea. And that essentially wraps it up right there. Holy hell. This rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper, doesn't it? I believe this is probably one of this is probably going to be one of the last overt events or attempts at marketing to this degree. I genuinely believe so, that this is probably going to be one of the last ones, because this playbook has been so thoroughly played out by this point that it is counterproductive. It's like what we heard in the earnings call from Disney, which I covered just the other day, where they realized that a lot of their marketing has actually been working against them, as in it has been negatively affecting people's perception of the entertainment before it even comes out. And maybe that lesson is beginning to sink in at Netflix as well. I might be being overly optimistic yet again here, but you'd think that the lesson would begin to sink in at some point, especially as now this hasn't even been explained properly. She has simply been given the rote talking points and then kept way away from the audience as long as possible, and then trotted out to hopefully do something small and neutral on Apple iTunes, which then turns into a much rather bigger thing, because this is the thing now. You are so deeply unpopular that a documentary series whose first episode no one even knew existed has now become a topic of mainstream news, to the point where an actual nation is committing to legal action against you. It is a good day to be on our side. At least, until the new Twitter CEO steps into place. That, incidentally, will be a topic for the ArchCast, because, my god, Elon, this might just be the dumbest thing you could possibly ever do. Until then, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.